somebody was kindly asking me about, what about saddlebags? Could you do a video on that? And I thought for a moment, and I realized that as a trainer, we were pretty much taught to use the NASM protocol. That's pretty much the dominant solution because it's tackling every single exercise protocol from an intrinsic place from the inside out. Great programs, NASM, great educations. But sometimes it causes people to overthink the remedy. And if you look at a variety of elite trainers, those who get results with their clients, you're going to see one commonality. And they may have all these sort of highbrow derivative exercises that appear to give more focus on angle. And so to kind of draw this back toward the initial question is, you have the saddlebags, which is like that bursal area, the tensor fasciae lata, the glute medius, it's in the frontal plane, right? I mean, everything from ice skaters to side bridges with kicks, right? To abduction exercises, spending time on the multi-hip. But the truth is that, this is the pattern that most new trainers would get stuck in. And most people look at a problem, right? It really is something of a mathematical solution or equation or how people approach this. Is like, you look at the problem, you identify the problem, you go straight to the problem, and all you end up doing is really exacerbating the problem, right? And then what would happen is most people would just stick one of their clients on an extreme fat loss program that seems to work during the day. Back in the 90s, I would have been cut out every bit of fat and focus in on something like Colbert Bailey's or Perdican type diet, which there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's like a 90s type. It just depends on the calories and the exact percentage between the type of carbohydrates you're taking in, anything from, the simpler giving yourself treats, taking in predominantly complex carbohydrates that have enough fiber sources in them, and then taking in, adequate amounts of fat and spreading out those fats among, omega-3, other healthy fatty acids, and so forth, right? So the best way to create this recomposition is to focus on building muscle mass in a particular area, to get more blood flow going in that area, to establish capillary bed density, and to take it very seriously, this art of recomposition. You've got more fat cells in an area because there's not enough blood flow. You've got fat composite in a particular area, and usually this is of a genetic propensity. I assume it's a female, but it's not always female. I mean, I've known a lot of males that actually have this issue where they store their lower body dominant. The typical person, when asked where they store the most, it would be, the lower abdomen, the visceral fat. So we know that we want to cut down on organ fat, liver fat, and we know that there's a huge correlation between said fat that's stored in the viscera, subcutaneous fat, and organ fat, that they're synonymous with one another. I myself ran into an issue that I never thought I would, where I was getting that man boob or that side boob, and slowly I'm working on it and I'm seeing that I'm making headway. What's causing this? Just like the remedy for replacing, or really, it really is replacing. It's replacing over time. If you look at the cause and the effect, and you look at the fat density and the number of fat cells and the accumulation in a particular area, right? Here are the saddlebags. And then say you were to fast forward to the remedy where you have this before and after, and you have this nicely chiseled vastus lateralis and, right around the bursal area, the tensor fasciae lata, the glute medius is popping, right? You didn't get there by just predominantly doing exercises, in fact, for that particular area. In fact, that would be something that you would add on as the icing on the cake, so to speak, near the end to really identify, right, that this area is highly defined, highly trained, and you're showcasing it at that point. But what really got you to that area is learning how to do the Valsalva hold, learning how to do heavy squats, right? And this doesn't have to be in the traditional way where you just do a barbell squat, but if you look at most trainers that are successful with themselves and they're successful with their clients, they are doing the really basic exercises on their own, the boring exercises, and that's really why you'll see me. I mean, I have a variety of exercises, thousands of exercises that I know how to do, that I've taken clients through, because the truth is that a lot of people really just want somebody to talk to. They want to be entertained. This is why they use trainers, whether they'll admit it to themselves. And some people that are just results oriented will come in and say, look, I heard you're one of the best. I heard you're really good. And I would like to just learn how to do it. I want to pay for a month or 6 weeks. If you think that that's recommended, I just want it straight from you. I want to learn what I'm supposed to do. Something that'll keep me busy for the next year or two. Yeah, I've had that conversation with people. They walk out that door. Many of them have come back and they say, yeah, I did exactly what you said. And I don't even really put a second thought into it, So some things that you can get are very generic, that'll start you on your way, start you on your journey to prep for this, because it's going to take you a good 2 or 3 months just to establish the ability to be able to do this effectively and safely. But if you wanted to go straight, cut to the chase and go straight to the source, you would hire a trainer that specializes in heavy lifts, squats, or you would observe somebody, or maybe someone who's really good at it, right? And you're probably going to need to buy a nice belt. You're going to need to probably buy something like, typically in most gyms, you'll be hard pressed to find any padding for the bar. And you want to prep like you're preparing to do the unthinkable, the unknown. And typically in an area where you have these issues, it'll either be the last thing that you ever wanted to do or the first thing. In other words, somebody who was doing a lot of lower body dominant explosive movements throughout their high school years, say they were your star athlete in high school, right? And they let things go. Wouldn't you know it, the very area where their powerhouse was at one time is where they predominantly store the fat, because that's this centric area where your body is used to focusing on recovery, right? So you can more, in my opinion, you can more easily patternize an effective change here, as opposed to somebody who generations of genetic flaw, we'll say, for lack of a better, your mother had it, your grandmother had it, and as long as you could remember, and you might sit around smoking cigarettes and eating donuts, and you might see a lot of the pre-indicators that led to this, but ultimately you don't have this behavior, at least not anymore, and you're trying to figure out, how do I recomposite, especially this area? I don't want to live like this anymore. Where you're alive in the right time, because all the information's there. And the number one thing that I would say for myself, and this is in total honesty, is I'd say you're not going to have any areas that are weak, any areas where you're storing predominantly more fat than another area, if you're focusing on explosive, heavy, compound exercises. Yeah, that would be, and I did this when I was 26 years old, many, many years ago, half a lifetime ago here. I more than half a lifetime ago, I ventured out and I went, this just isn't working for me. I was doing all the things that were in Flex Magazine, Muscle and Fitness. Of course, at that time, back in the 90s, nobody ever admitted that most of these programs that are written out are written out with PEDs in mind. So anybody who's on a natural course isn't going to garner or gain the same effect from this exercise program. I think probably there are some exceptions, like the way that Lee Haney trained. I think when I would do programs like Lee Haney had suggested, there was a lot of pre-exhaustion, right? There are a lot of drop sets. A lot of the things that hold true today will always hold true, right? And so once you get down your base with your 4 to 6 sets of heavy squats, where if you can't do anything else in the week, that is the one exercise that you should focus on. Make sure you're not going to get hemorrhoids from this. Make sure that you time your meals out properly, right? Make sure that you learn to use the restroom at the proper time. Make sure that you have proper hydration, right? So a lot of people will do better when they have partners with heavy lifting. Training partners are an invaluable tool. Thanks, Paulo. When we were teenagers, we tore it up together. And without you, man, I wouldn't have been able to build that base. I mean, when I was a teenager, it was T-bar, heavy T-bar rows, obviously heavy bench press, getting into doing heavy flies, putting a pulley together and learning how to properly do tricep extensions to activate my particular triceps and the way that they are put together physiologically. And you'll find that kind of like John Frusciante stating that everyone has to create their own religion, we all learn and we all see things through the scopic view of our own traditions, of our own unique and special parallax view. And you're going to have to learn yourself. But the beauty of this is that these compound exercises, though you might, there might be some variance there where you're less sagittally based, and you tend to, if you've got these saddlebags, there's a high indication that you have these this genetic, not always, but this genetic gift underneath that marbly package of popcorn, that you have this amazing sweeping vastus lateralis that you may have never even seen, right? And throughout you're carrying this torch for your family, you sort of cover it over, and we just have big thighs, big strong thighs, but in your mind you're thinking, I wonder how much of that is really fat, right? Well, you're going to find out, and the only way to find out is to start building. And the only way to really build up, this doesn't change, is when you're gaining muscle, you're going to need to take in an excess number of calories, and you're going to gain some fat. And I've never, ever found anyone or any diet that could route around this one specific reality. And that is, if you're not taking in 300 to 500 extra calories after your training, at specific times, your body will just sort of decide when it wants to take in these calories, and you don't know why. You feel like you're being gluttonous. You feel like you're sitting around. The first thing you should ask yourself is, am I sore? Have I been doing my homework? How deep am I in? How deep in the bucket am I doing my squats, right? And some people may not do well with these powerlifting exercises, and they might find themselves really being good at Olympic exercises. Some people might see or even investigate the Olympic lifts, the clean, the snatch, the jerk, right? or doing the hang cleans, right? Where you're starting in a mid position so you can really get down the explosiveness, because it's about that load explode, right? It has everything to do with timing. And once you get that timing down and you see that it's about time, it's about explosiveness, it's about going through this repetition with as much explosive, we're going to say it's called violence, right? That's how it's referred to, right? It's a violent exercise. And in this day, everybody's afraid of exhibiting any sort of force or violence. If you're ever going to do it in that one moment, in that one situation, and you're going to need to learn again you're going to need to cue yourself in on time under tension, right? Being able to sustain, particularly through your core. So a lot of core exercises, stabilizing around joint systems. Many people don't realize it, but how much the heavier you get in those squats, the more the traps are involved in this exercise. The more the erecte spinae, and a lot of the exercises that you could do on a 35 degree or a hyperextension, eventually using some weights, right? Or learning how to do stiff leg deadlifts, Romanian deadlifts, looking up while you're doing it, really timing this and focusing in on this, thoroughly stretching out the hip complex and the hip area. Prepping up and learning how to explode through abduction, glute medius, you have the glute minimus, the glute medius, and the glute maximus, right? And spending some time on the multi-hip trainer, right? And what's popular these days is that you never saw in the gym before, but people were doing it. I used to do these single leg plank exercises where I would get on my back, in a supinated position, put my hands down by my side, put my head firmly on the ground so that my back was able to go through full extension, thrust my hips forward, right? And push to the heel. Well, you're using your body weight to do this. You could even put like a dumbbell on your hips and do this, but what we have now is throughout all these gyms, there's this hybrid equipment that is just 100% involved with building up the glute maximus, right? And it really depends on where you're looking. Like if you're to push your head down on the mat or on the ground, right, and you kind of feel it on the highest portion of your head, the tension as you're thrusting, you're allowing that stabilization to radiate all the way through your spine, right? As you're thrusting and you're squeezing your glutes, you're going to get a little bit of glute minimus activation out there, and you're going to be able to focus on the shape a little bit more. Same thing on the multi-hip, where as you're sweeping back and you're going in through that glute flexion, you look up, right? You look up right at that moment, you kind of hang it there and then pull it back, right? Really own it. But the one exercise that you've got to get down, and you could do this with kettlebells also, but the kettlebells are a great solution because if you've ever ordered Girya kettlebells in the kg or the pound sequence of solutions, you're going to see a big discrepancy there of just how much weight it's going to take. So I've seen these kettlebell totes that are pretty popular today, but they only go up to 55 pounds. Even for the smallest, seemingly least muscled female, which you better be careful, because a lot of these people that are 135 pounds and they're Olympic lifters will surprise you, right? Because what happens is you become denser, right? You don't just increase gaining weight. That is the popular notion of putting on dense, lean, trained, explosive muscle. It's fast twitch muscle. And it's almost like a tiger or a cheetah. You're just going to keep getting smaller and tighter and stronger. And that is ultimately the goal, right? But like form follows function, function into form. But the number one thing that you want to focus on is being able to time out your breathing, create intra-abdominal pressure, right? And to time out through the concentric when you're going to go through that heavy lift and when you're going to start looking up, driving straight up and back, making sure everything, all the muscles are centered and involved, squeezing those glutes, looking up for dear life and going through that explosive exercise where there's nothing more gratifying than hitting personal bests, personal 1 rep maxes, especially with squats. Don't hurt yourself. Do it right. Keep driving the solution. Work with people who are like-minded in their efforts. When you really get up there, everything from chalk to smelling salts become invaluable. So you might want to get, if you really want results, you're going to get around an environment and the people that are focused on exactly that. If you go into a lot of these CrossFit places, you're going to see people, heavy lifters, focusing on a particular mesocycle action-based protocol. In other words, they're going to be going toward more of these hybrid exercises, i.e. maximizing the number of repetitions and doing these repetitions correctly for the most, dominant effect. But a lot of these people will be focusing in on particular stages of a movement that will go toward the protocol of the entirety of a holistic program that can physically go through mobilization, stabilization, max strength, all the way up to power and explosiveness, and then focusing in on speed, agility, and quickness, and then cycling back through with a maximal amount of hypertrophy. But if you want to get rid of saddlebags, the number one exercise is learning how to do explosive, time under tension, intra-abdominal pressure, properly timed breathing, Valsalva hold exercises such as the squat. And some may even say, on a much lesser note, the deadlift. Deadlifts aren't for everybody. Not everybody needs to do them or is put together in such a way. But if you are, and you miss that one exercise, you could replace that 10 exercises with that one exercise. I think squats, you could replace nearly the same number of exercises just with that one exercise. And of course, heavy bent over rows, I'll even put that before bench. Heavy bench press, right? And then military presses to a lesser extent. Because for some people, it will entirely derail their efforts so you have ground substance that is, so when you're repairing and you're going through this, what we're really doing is we're breaking down, if you get into Huxley sliding filament theory, that's great. You're looking at the actin and the myosin, and, then we get into capillary bed density, but your diet, you're going to have a little more calcium, a little more magnesium involved there for ionization. But when it comes down to it, what you're really doing is you're trying to build up that ground substance, right? That is in the line of force. So a lot of times physiologically, when you're put together in such a way and you've been doing, you've been working on this area like your chest, you go into doing military presses with the same conceptualization and you've completely screwed yourself up and you're putting way too much pressure around your shoulder complex and the capsules, right? And you might actually be causing yourself damage. And I always did better, and I'm doing this now, where I would pre-fatigue with side laterals, very controlled, for me, heavy side laterals, and then I would just keep going. And so this leads into a little bit of what Mike Mentzer talks about when he discusses this heavy duty, high intensity training. And really, instead of really getting caught up in all the groundwork, the pipe work with Mike Mentzer, Dorian Yates, and refuting, and saying, oh no, there's not a lot of validity to this. The claim stands here and shouldn't go beyond that, which is if you were to do one set to total exhaustion that involved as many muscle fibers as possible and would wake an area up, you would start out just like this concept of doing a very heavy squat, right? You would start out with a maximal movement that would get as much fibrage involved as possible. And then you would continue on once you wake the area up without taking much of a break or any break at all. And you would do, pre-fatigue drop set into a lighter weight, a workable weight. So oftentimes I'll go as high as 55 pounds for side laterals, wake the area up, drop down to 40s, drop down to 30s. And there's been times when I'll even drop down to like 20-pound side laterals, right? And the gripe is, there's too much traps involved. No, allow your traps to absorb the exercise. When your traps can stabilize and build up, right, to fullness, you're going to get more deltoid involved. It's just like the scenario that most people point out is, you have to do it correctly. And it's like, no, you have to do it correctly based on your own physiology, the firing patterns that you're going through. You don't want to overthink things. You want to keep them fluid, but you have to make sure that every single area is conditioned, right? So this is why what I was alluding to earlier is finding that exact angle. And the beauty is that you're going to most likely, if you're not overly, tight in a certain area, like if you're focusing on rear delts, you're going to naturally drop down into the position where you're going to be able to activate your rear delts properly just through your own physiology. But you're going to have to experiment a little bit. You might have to bend over a little more and then exhaust that lower portion of your rear deltoid, and then kind of go a little more on an angle, right? And maybe even center some rear deltoid activation with heavy bent over rows, or TRX, supinated hanging rows, where you've got your feet suspended up on a column or a pillar, and you're creating like this forced activation, right? But you are going to have to investigate your own physiology, how you're put together, and create your own philosophy and your own religion with your training. All right, be well.